Good afternoon, everybody. We all good to start up the back? Sound guys are good? Excellent. Thank you all for coming. This is the Organics Fogo and Organics session. For those who don't know me, and I've introduced myself a few times today, Mike Ritchie, Managing Director of MRA Consulting. We have four very, very competent speakers to talk to us today. I'll introduce them one at a time. We will have a few minutes of Slido questions, I believe. Save it all to the end for Slido? Okay, right, we're going to have four speakers, then we're going to do open forum Q&A. Obviously, Fogo is big. Commercial food mandates start on the 1st of July next year. So the collection industry is already gearing up to do commercial food collection. From a very slow start and a very low base. The big companies are now looking seriously at the space, so congratulations to Penny Sharp on that and getting that going. And of course, we all start domestic Fogo in 2030. So we're seeing a lot of tenders and strategies coming out now to look at what's the commercial reality. A number of councils looking, interestingly, at separated garden organics and food only as a collection. I haven't met anybody yet who's thought about picking up Fogo and trommeling it and getting the grass and food into one stream and the woody waste into a different stream. So I'll be interested if any of our experts want to talk to that particular issue and whether that grass and food stream is actually any good for anaerobic digestion. That's an emerging space. I'm interested in any research there. And then, of course, we're seeing the infrastructure build out going on around composting and transfer stations in Sydney and around the regions. A call out and a congratulations to Regional New South Wales. You have led the program into Fogo for the best part of a decade now, and it's now Sydney's time to catch up, and that rollout is now happening. So with that brief introduction, by the way, Fogo will divert probably 1.2 million tonnes of additional organics out of landfill in New South Wales when it starts, and commercial food somewhere between 300 and 500,000 tonnes. So with those two initiatives, we're talking 1.5 million tonnes diversion from landfill and possibly in the order of 2 to 3 million tonnes of emissions abatement. So it's no small beer. It's a great initiative by government. The challenge, of course, is contamination. The challenge is making sure that we get our contamination rates down to below 2% and that we actually capture the food. And there's a lot of conversations going on at the moment about how much food do you actually capture. And the average for New South Wales is only 34%, although best practice is about 70%. So the question when you're doing your maths is, do I do the average or do I use best practice for my modelling and expectations of the future? And I'm sure some of our speakers will talk to that as well today. So without further ado, our first speaker is Zach Orton, Manager of New South Wales Environment Protection Authority. He's speaking on promoting a circular economy at the New South Wales Fogo mandates. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you very much. AV screen is not working again, so this will be fun. Anybody up the back? Yeah. No, none of this is working, but that's okay. As in the...
Okay, it might just...
Yeah, no, that's right. He's trying to fix it. All right, I might just kick off. My name's Zach Orton. I'm a policy manager in the Circular Economy branch at the New South Wales EPA. I joined 7 months ago and jumped straight into Fogo and legislating Fogo. And then more recently, I've worked on the Product Lifecycle Responsibility Act. So it's been a nice trial by fire. I've spoken to a lot of you in this room presenting on this. And I was going to say this at the end, but if anybody has any questions that don't get answered by a Slido, I'm always open to answering anything that anybody might want to ask, and I don't think I've knocked back a request to meet with anybody about any of this, so happy to. So I'll start by acknowledging traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting, pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal people in the room today. So today I'm going to talk about some of the challenges to achieving a circular economy, our sort of transition to Fogo, the development of the mandates, so some of the consultation that went into it, the mandates themselves, and then the next steps for the government. So what we're really trying to achieve is a safe circular economy. It's probably something that you've heard a lot. Greater Sydney is facing a significant landfill crisis. That's one of the things that is motivating this particular reform, in addition to all the other benefits that go with it. That shortfall in... Oh, something's happening. Oh, there we go. That shortfall in landfill by 2030 poses significant challenges. It's expected to drive up the cost of disposing of waste. It has a range of detriments. Look, a safe circular economy requires us to be keeping materials and resources in circularity for as long as possible, while simultaneously reducing the amount of waste directed to landfill. To achieve that, we have to address a number of things that a lot of speakers in the last couple of days have spoken about. So recycling rates have stagnated, the effectiveness of the waste levy is diminishing. We have to come up with alternative levers to divert waste from landfill. Oh, there you go. This is a graph that you might have seen the other day that sort of expresses the landfill crisis that we're facing. And Fogo presents a real opportunity in this space to divert significant amount of waste from landfill, while also having a range of benefits in terms of emissions reduction. So exhausting capacity means that waste would need to be sent outside of Sydney. Transporting waste outside of Sydney costs more to your average resident. So increasing costs for households. It adds strain on the transportation network, increases emissions due to longer transportation, and increases the need for government intervention and investment. So the New South Wales Food Waste Baseline, enabling a circular economy stimulates growth in the resource recovery and reuse sectors, as well as creating new innovative industries and jobs through innovation and investment in circular goods and services. So New South Wales produces about 1.7 million tonnes of food waste a year, which accounts for 22% of the national total. 70% of this waste is edible, with over half of it being disposed in landfill. Food waste disposed of in New South Wales landfills generates 3.1 million tonnes of CO2 emissions every year. The highest single sector of food waste generation sent to landfill comes from households, followed by retail, hospitality sectors and institutions. Only 2,724 businesses in New South Wales have a food waste collection. So transitioning to a safe circular economy means keeping valuable material out of landfill, moving away from a linear economy to one that embraces waste, reducing food waste, reusing what is still edible, or repurposing and recycling it. So our progress to date, this has been spoken about before, approximately 71% of New South Wales households now have an organic service. There has been a great deal of progress, even without a legislated mandate. But the discussion that's been over the last few days is now there's some harder parts that we need to influence. So the EPA has been supporting the diversion of food waste from landfill since 2014, when it launched the first organics program. We've invested $41 million in infrastructure, delivering 730,000 tonnes per annum of more processing capacity. On average, contamination remains low, with an average rate of 2.2%. There are also 11,000 tonnes per annum more food being rescued each year. So why Fogo? I feel like some of what I've just said answers that, but I'll kick on anyway. The New South Wales Government committed to mandating Fogo in 2020 with the release of the Waste and Sustainable Materials Strategy. The commitment forms part of the broader Australian Government's net zero commitment. So as I said earlier, with recycling rates having stagnated, and we need to be able to pull on more levers to try to get close to those 2030 goals, which I think the panel's consensus yesterday was that we're not going to meet, but we want to get as close as we possibly can. So bin audits indicate that on average more than 30% of a household's residual bin still comprises food waste. The Fogo mandates aim to tackle food waste generated by households and the largest generators of the C&I sector. The mandates present one of the biggest opportunities to divert valuable, nutrient-rich material out of landfill and create a safe, circular, recycled product. The mandates also create certainty for industry to invest. There's a defined endpoint that we know that people will have to comply. Okay, so collaboration and feedback. The mandates were exhibited for public consultation mid-last year. We received extensive feedback through that process. There was 266 stakeholder submissions. We held public consultation. We held targeted consultation through September and November in the lead up to developing the legislation. And then the government introduced the legislation in November of 2024, which had a built-in window of another 2 months until we it was debated in February. So we held consultation with ROCs, councils. We had a working group with waste industry operators, waste management peaks. We had ongoing feedback throughout that process when developing those mandates. And that stakeholder engagement is key to developing effective policy. So we're focused on and committed to a policy outcome and behaviour change approach. I think the Minister's said it a number of times, the second reading speech says it, all of the sort of correspondence, whenever I've been asked to speak to people, it is not a compliance-led approach. The government is focused on a policy outcome. We want to help councils, businesses achieve a goal. We want to divert as much waste as possible from landfill. We're not looking to be taking that sort of compliance-led punitive approach. So the mandates themselves are made up of the household mandates, business mandates, and food donation recording requirements. As I said, the bill was introduced in November. It passed after debate in February. It had bipartisan support. It was a nice one to be a part of. Both sides of politics spoke in support of it. There was very little opposition. The bill passed with one minor amendment to establish a implementation advisory panel. So that window, as I said, it gave stakeholders the opportunity to talk to us, for us to explain a bit more about what we're doing, to reinforce that message that we're not out here trying to punish people for non-compliance. So I'll go into a bit more detail about the mandates themselves. So the household mandate applies to local councils. It requires councils to provide households with a weekly Fogo collection service, collected and transported separately from other waste. Put simply, there are three main elements to comply when you make it as simple as possible. You have to have a collection, has to be weekly, and it has to be transported separately to other waste. The purpose of that is not, councils will not be chased for contamination in a bin. It is around making sure that it is not a blatant disregard for the legislation. So, having a red bin collected by the same truck that collects the Fogo. So the household mandates apply from 1 July 2030. And okay, I'll go on to the... So the business mandates apply to relevant premises. This includes premises such as supermarkets, hospitality businesses, hospitals, correction facilities, education facilities. And the first tranche of the business mandates will begin on 1 July 2026. Starts with the biggest waste generators, and it's based on residual waste capacity. And there's tranches from 1 July 2026, 1 July 2028, and 1 July 2030. As I said earlier, It is not a punitive approach. There are penalties for non-compliance, but it is that's an important function of regulations, but it is not the focus of this government. So the food donation recording requirements apply to all large supermarkets of over 1,000 square metres of gross floor area. The monthly reporting includes a breakdown of different food groups. The idea behind it is to encourage more food donation to charities and other things and have usable food actually used for people. So the EPA can publish this data. It can point to places that charities can approach if they're not donating food to someone. So the ARA and compliance, the appropriate regulatory authority will be shared between the EPA and councils. So the EPA will be the ARA for the household mandate, food donation mandates, and part of the business mandates, which is for institutions and government-owned businesses. And councils will be responsible for other businesses. So council officers appointed as authorised officers under the Food Act are taken to be AOs for the purposes, under the POEO Act for the purpose of enforcing the business mandate. This is not something that councils have to utilise. It was something that we wrote in as another option for enforcement and compliance in order to be able to execute that function. That is not something that is mandated as a requirement. Any penalty notices issued by council authorised officers will be retained by councils to support ongoing compliance. The EPA will continue to provide support and guidance for councils as the mandates come into effect to ensure businesses and households understand their obligations and are empowered to use their Fogo collection services effectively. So exemptions under the mandates. Ultimately, we want everybody to comply, but we also recognise that a one-size-fits-all isn't necessarily appropriate. There's going to be different time at which processing becomes available in different areas. There's also complications of contracts and things like that people already have in place. We're focused on a policy outcome and behaviour change approach, as I've said many times now, and we understand that there are certain circumstances that will require exemptions. The intention there is to have time-limited exemptions to help people get to a stage where they can comply, not blanket exemptions. So as it says here, and it's also around working to keep contamination low and produce a clean stream. We want to work with councils and businesses in that endeavour. So the time-bound exemptions will allow for industry to invest in areas where there is a lack of processing infrastructure. We intend to provide predominantly proactive exemptions to reduce the need for people to have to approach the EPA for an exemption. So we're working through that at the moment, and that will come shortly. Yeah. So the Implementation Advisory Panel, the only amendment made to the bill during parliamentary debate was the inclusion of a Fogo Implementation Advisory Panel. The panel will provide advice to the Minister when regulations are proposed and be consulted on matters regarding aspects of the mandates as implementation begins. The Act outlines that the panel must include at least 2 members nominated by local government New South Wales and at least 2 members representing the waste and resource recovery sector. The panel is intended to reflect the important partnerships needed to effectively implement the mandates and will assist in identifying challenges and opportunities during the rollout of the mandates to households and businesses. We are going through the administration of that panel at the moment. Anybody that's worked in government will understand that there is a level of bureaucracy and administration to establishing government panels. So that is definitely in progress. It's not something that's been forgotten about. And there'll be more information around membership of that panel in the coming months. So lastly, while the mandates have been passed into legislation, there is still a lot of work left for us to do. As discussed, we're working through the exemptions pathway, implementation of that advisory panel, and the exemptions, there's a key focus on the first tranche, recognising businesses affected in 2026. There's also education programs which will continue with a statewide awareness campaign to be rolled out ahead of the residential mandates in 2030. There's work being done at the moment on business guidance as well. It's essential that we continue to support our industry and council partners during the transition to Fogo and to encourage broad-scale uptake by businesses and households. Look, our role will be to continue to provide guidance and businesses for councils and businesses to meet their obligations under the mandates. The EPA will also continue to provide a range of programmatic supports to maximise landfill diversion and reduce emissions. Look, as I said earlier, I'm always happy to chat to anybody that might have any questions. So if your questions don't get answered by Slido, please feel free to reach out or catch me afterwards. But thank you very much.
Great talk. Our next speaker, Navigating the Mandate, Best Practices, Technologies and Collaboration by Sean Rainford, Associate Principal, Resource and Waste Management at Arup. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for the invite to talk. Okay. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about project delivery from our experience working with a number of our council clients. I'll talk briefly about the scale of the problem, regulatory drivers. I won't linger on that because I think Zach's done a cracking job of that. What do we need to do and when? And then I'll focus on best practice project delivery and some steps that we recommend, and some of the lessons learnt on projects that we've worked on in the last few years. So the scale of the problem, I think 1.2 from New South Wales. There's a lot of numbers about, but Australia-wide, I think 2.5 million tonnes of food waste per year. 3%, I think, as Mike mentioned, of Australia's annual greenhouse emissions is a substantial number from food waste itself. And the benefits, as we know, we've heard about reduced greenhouse gas emissions, improved soil health and structure by getting those clean organics back into the soil, and reduce landfill costs from an economic perspective. Key drivers we've heard about, the mandates. We've got the WASM, we've got the National Waste Policy Action Plan as well, driving behaviour towards recovery of organics. I'll skip over that actually. I think we talked about, probably relevant actually to just talk about the 2030 timescale. Obviously businesses from 2026 to 2030, depending on how much waste has been produced by businesses. But the 2030 is going to be difficult to reach for some councils and some businesses. If a rigorous process is followed in order to get to that point, and depending on how that service is procured. Key considerations for Fogo project development. Project life cycle, in terms of delivery of a project from concept to commissioning of a facility, is really what I'm talking about. Can be complex and lengthy. Timing challenge, again, back to that 2030 timescale, anything from 2 to 6 years, depending on the scale of the project, in-vessel composting or windrow composting, depending on which way, which solution is chosen. Funding and procurement, engagement with the market, with contractors, with technology providers is absolutely crucial. And of course, for many councils, there's significant political considerations, the impact on ratepayers, time to absorb costs, ramp up costs. These are all considerations. It's a bit delicate, this, isn't it? Got to be very careful. So project life cycle, as I said before, this is in the context of project delivery, councils, larger councils that might be looking to build a facility, go to market, 20,000 tonnes plus is probably more about the context of what I'm talking about here. But we're working with a number of different councils ACT Government, Central Coast Council, and we're along the journey with a lot of these councils. So we've gone through these steps with our clients, and there's a few learnings that I wanted to share. So I'll talk to these individually, but we generally go through a project direction phase, which is very high level, which serves to review technology at a very high level, set the business case, set us up for the business case, and then get progressively more detailed as we go along, moving into technical financial feasibility, and then into business case, where really the project parameters are set. Tender development and evaluation, next into planning and approvals, and then through design and build and implementation and commissioning. Okay, so as I said, context. This is a structured project delivery, very much evidence-based, appropriate for larger councils, government agencies, typically for public-private partnership type approach. In-vessel composting or similar, 20,000 tonnes per annum. There are some risks, I think, which Aaron pointed to in this space that need to be considered as well, that are emerging. So the environment, the risk environment is also changing. So the first phase, that project review and direction, is really the critical scene setting stage. We're looking at technology, we're looking at what technology not to use for the type of feedstock that we're going to expect from that particular project. It establishes the project parameters with the stakeholders and the decision makers of our clients, the councils, the why of the project, the technology type, the scale, the amount of material, the what really of the project, and how we're going to deliver it. So what type of delivery model is appropriate for that particular client. We'd look at the impact on residents very early on, and having this early stage allows for planning for curbside collection, to consider things like the weekly collection frequency. It talks at a very high level about education and the needs for education, and we put that very, very high on the consideration early on. And we think it's important to have an executive sponsor. These projects can go on for many, many years. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of stakeholders. And the project needs to be laid out for councillors, for executives along the process. So important to have that consistency of messaging and someone who's taking that project forward. Got a problem with the clicker. Huh? It was moving? Sorry. Okay, so the technical and financial feasibility, really building on that direction phase. It needs to be robust and informed. There's a lot of thinking time and a lot of discussion about choice of technology and the site selection, etc., etc. We'll be looking at additional design development at this stage. There might be some geotechnical studies that need to be done. There might be some logistics. But really to fill the gaps, the unknowns, so that we can get to a much more accurate CapEx and OpEx figure, which then leads into the business case. Engagement with procurement departments, really crucial. This is not something that councils do every day. And it's important to have a discussion with them about methods of delivery. At this stage, we'd be considering different methods of delivery of procurement as well, and to have an open discussion about that with our councils is really crucial. Sizing's fundamental. We'd be looking at more detailed analysis of feedstock. We'd be looking at forecasts, And that drives, obviously, the size of the facility. And we need to have a really good overview of population growth, etc., in the particular area. Internal engagement with council staff on education. As I said before, we recommend that very early in the process. Business case development, the project's really been set in terms of the technology and the location, the site, but we're trying to lock down CapEx and OpEx in a much more detailed manner. Crucial to align with the requirements, for example, of New South Wales Treasury, particularly if funding's required further down the track. But following that methodology, it's quite a detailed process. There needs to be qualified practitioners to put that business case together to make sure you're future-proofed. Needs to be comprehensive. We're talking about an 80 to 100-page document potentially for a business case if you follow New South Wales Treasury guidelines. And the risk process, having a look at project risks, putting the right risk allocation into the business case is crucial. And it's a good conversation to have for all of the stakeholders. Through to tender development and evaluation, Arup would normally get involved in writing technical specifications, helping with the setting of KPIs. We'd look at Australian standards, codes of practice, safety standards, those key requirements for tenders. And Aaron mentioned this before, the contracts really need to represent the realities of dealing with a complex organic stream. There's a limit to what processors can do in an organics processing plant for pre-treatment at the front end. And once you get plastics and other materials in a tunnel, for example, and it sits there at 60 degrees or 55 degrees for a couple of weeks, and then it sits in a maturation pile, you do get leaching of chemicals and other materials into the compost itself. So very difficult once it's gone in to get it out. So 2% has been talked about by many. 2% even is a lot when you look at it visually. In terms of the density is obviously very low. So by mass, it's you end up with a large amount of material. So it's a hot topic in the industry. Equitable risk sharing, that's difficult to say, between the proponent and the contractor. You can't really divest the risk to the processor or to the contract. You expect some expertise to be able to process the material, but ultimately the cost has to be borne somewhere. And that covers, all the way through from processing the material, quality material, and the markets for that material. And the benefit of that material really in a circular economy, from a circular economy perspective. You need to have a focus list of market participants. There's, it's a relatively immature field, market. In terms of delivery partners, there's a number of players, but it is a relatively small sector here, and it's, we're just starting really the journey in terms of large-scale Fogo, Fogo processing, for example. There is a bit of market fatigue out there. We've done a lot of work with councils on stakeholder engagement, talking to processors, talking to technology providers. So important to do that well and do that comprehensively. Planning and approvals, of course, state significant development in many of these cases. It is quite complex and it's quite lengthy. As many of you will know how long it takes to get through planning for a facility that processes waste. It's fraught with difficulty. But we would suggest early engagement with DeFi and EPA is really crucial, both from a perspective of them understanding your proposal, but also with regards funding further down the track if that's an opportunity. Quality of the scoping report, which is put together to get seers, really crucial. The more detail to DeFi, the better, because otherwise you'll end up with a series of seers requirements which might be not relevant to the project. So that needs to be thought through carefully. Community awareness during the planning and approval stage, an openness to consult, comprehensive consultation with local stakeholders. Need to confront that stake head on. And commonly, having a dedicated resource for that is really helpful. During the design and build phase, often there's an owner's engineer that sits alongside the client, offers PM support, can bring operational experience to help in the design process. The more heads around the table, really, when you're developing the design, the better from our perspective. Independent verification that it works, and also it can support decision-making at the executive level when you're talking about project delivery. So having that input from a technical perspective is often very useful. And then finally, implementation and commissioning. When these facilities get up and running, and we've just been working with Dulverton Waste Management in Tasmania, and helping them through the commissioning phase as an owner's engineer. It's a living thing, right? So that you think you have a plan for how it's going to go, but it needs tweaking, it needs management. There's a bit of problem solving as well when you kick off. So an in-depth understanding of the process is crucial. Many commissioning plans to put together. There can be 20-odd commissioning plans, I think, for Dulverton that we help them with, but quite a task. Just a quick, this is an interesting project that we did with Dulverton, actually. The use of science and some more cutting edge engineering, I guess. We got asked by Matt at Dulverton to do some computational fluid dynamic modelling. I didn't know we could do it, but apparently we could. Really wanted to know how the odour was going to be managed within the facility. So we put our clever people to put a model together. And this really just shows the movement of air around the facility in the reception hall. And he had some concerns that one of the vents might be in the wrong position. We did the modelling, and we found that indeed that was the case, and just moving that vent by 1 or 2 meters solved the problem effectively and ended up with a far better airflow around the reception hall. So it was a really good outcome and an example of using science, using some quite sophisticated techniques to help in the management of that particular problem. The designer was quite happy. It was a small move of event, and everybody understood the process a lot better by the end of it. But it also allowed for stakeholders in the project to understand what the issue was and why things needed to be changed. A really interesting project, actually, that we did there. So summary, complex delivery can take a long time. Engage with the stakeholders early. Don't underestimate the time that's needed for that. Some rigor in the process really helps any rework down the track. Funding requirements I talked about, and an understanding of the facility operation and how that works. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean. Brilliant. All right, our last speaker, and I'm nudging people forward so we can get to your questions. Our last speaker is Fogo, Andrew Ho, Group Manager, Waste and Cleansing for City of Parramatta Council, and his statement is Fogo, City of Parramatta experience, is there a best practice? Andrew, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this conference. Quick show of hands, who's from a council here? Or Sydney Council? So, I suppose most of you are probably embarking on that journey of implementing Fogo, so hopefully my presentation will provide some, I suppose, learnings or takeaways that you can bring back to your council. The wonderful thing about council is plagiarism is approved, so there's no point reinventing the wheel. Before I get started, and obviously the focal point on my presentation is really about, the council's endorsed the service model, we've awarded contract, and the focus of this presentation is really that next step of implementing that service model. But before I get started, I'd like to say thanks to my waste team and some of the members are here today. You hate to forget to think, but they're the ones that actually did the physical work. I'm just up here taking the credit. But yeah, so I suppose this is a clicker. I'll figure it out as I go. But my presentation is really divided into a couple of sections. It's where is Parramatta, what's changing or what changed, how we delivered the change, the challenges that we came across and how we solutionized it, what's next, and obviously the next steps, and obviously what lessons we learnt along the way. So City of Parramatta, we're geographically and demographically the centre of Sydney, with a population of 280,000, with 100,000 residents, and we span about 80 square kilometres. We're also year-marked as a rapid growing city, with annual population growth rate of just under 2%. We're also a diverse community. As you probably note in the last point, we're a large proportion of our community speak a second language, with Chinese, Korean, Hindi and Arabic. Oops, sorry. They said to point at the camera. Oh, I went too far. There we go. So council rolled out its Fogo service in November of last year as part of the new waste contract, which spans over the next 10 years with options to extend. So what actually changed? First and foremost, we introduced a weekly organics service. So for the most part, Parramatta's had organics collection, but that was fortnightly, and it was only for the garden organics as of November. Food waste is going into that bin and it's collected weekly. What also changed was the garbage bin. Historically, our households had a 140 litre service. That was reduced to an 80 litre service being the standard, with residents having the option to upgrade should they wish. And to support the Fogo service, each household received a kitchen caddy, as well as a distribution of liners every 6 months. Also acknowledging that some households might have greater needs, they were able to pick up liners from any of our Parramatta libraries. I just want to highlight the fact that due to the size and complexity of our LGA, we are rolling out Fogo in 2 stages. The first stage was to SUDs and MUDs below 30 unit complexes, with stage 2 being planned at the moment. That will be rolled out to the remainder of our unit complexes, which are the high density developments that we obviously acknowledge needed a bit more bespoke arrangement and working with those individual complexes for a solution that sort of works for us as well as them. I guess through our journey, the single biggest focal point of our rollout wasn't so much about the introduction of Fogo, and we learned that along the way, but the focal point was about taking away the 140 litre garbage service and giving residents with an 80. And that perhaps probably made up 50% of our workload when it came to service requests and inquiries. And so, obviously part of the best practice that we consider was being fluid and able to pivot and respond to that quickly. This gives you a bit of a snapshot in terms of our communication and engagement plan. what I believe we did well was we engaged, not only did we engage with our councillors and executive team early on in the journey and got their buy-in, or most certainly got their buy-in and decision and guidance early on, which obviously helped with getting endorsements and whatnot, but we also engaged early on with our internal stakeholders in terms of the communication, design elements, as well as our rates team and IT team, bringing them along the journey at the beginning so that they could be part of that decision making. And I was upfront from the beginning. I said to them, this is a significant change. It's one of the single biggest change in Parramatta in the last couple of decades. And we need you as part of the journey because, you know, you guys are subject matter experts when it comes to rates adjustments, which there is a significant component when we were changing the domestic waste charge for houses going from a 140 to an 80, which we needed the rates and IT team, as well as the marketing and design team in terms of developing the community. Because at the end of the day, you know, we're waste people. We know how to provide a waste service, but it's shaping that into a communication and what messaging to use to the community. You know, we were heavily relying on our community and communication and design team to come up with the strategies and execution. So, you know, my fairly simple response to them was, we need to do this. I can offer you the support. Just tell me how much money you need, how many resources you need, and I'll find a way to get that for you. So working with our comms team, we wanted our Fogo campaign to be catchy. I mean, you only have to look at sort of famous companies, you know, just look at Nike, and, you know, you automatically associate Nike with Just Do It. So we, you know, obviously as a team, we conceptualised and went, how do we make our Fogo campaign catchy? I mean, obviously we don't have the endless budget like Nike, but you know, there's not a reason to stop us. And as we sort of workshopped and solutionised that, we found that, you know, if we come up with a catchy phrase or a jingle, we can get that conversation started. And we landed on the theme, which is Feed It to Fogo. One of the other things, our particular focus on the campaign was also centred around kids and young family, because most certainly they made a significant portion of our demographics, and they're also the future generation. You know, influencing them on from early on helps create that generational shift in towards embracing, you know, Fogo and the change. I don't know, but I assume that a lot of you, like myself, have kids, and you find that kids are very influential. I just hope technology works now, because I'll show you the jingle and I can probably... There we go. And I think that you guys might be walking out of here remembering this jingle, and if it does, then it's done its job.
They'd like you to know about a change to where your everyday scraps will go. It'll really help reduce our landfill waste. Plus will make Parramatta a heaps good place. It's a new thing called Fogo. Fogo? 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 It's where your food organics and garden organics go. Here we go. Meat and veggie scraps. Last week's fish. Eggs and dairy too. It's a really long list. Basically anything you can eat or grow. Feed it to Fogo. It helps you keep your red bin thin. Cause now you got a place to put your food scraps in. When that old takeaway needs a place to decay, and last Tuesday's dinner is no longer a winner, and before the prawn shells get those nasty smells, I'll feed it to Fogo. And when your kitchen caddy's full, you just take it outside and feed it to me, yo. Feed it to Fogo.
So I touched a bit about the process. So obviously, you know, we started early on with internal stakeholders going, you know, this is the outcome we want to get to. We need your support. So sort of outline the resources and, you know, in terms of, you know, manpower budgets that you would need to help us assist that. So, you know, there was a lengthy negotiation process, and we'll just leave it at that. We'll call it negotiation. But we finally landed on an outcome where we put on additional staff from customer service within my own waste team, as well as communication design, provided additional support to rates. We created fancy dashboards that were shared across the different stakeholders, so we can monitor live the number of service requests that we were receiving, the sort of issues we were tackling, so we can respond to them fairly quickly. And part of my commitment was also, giving weekly updates to the executive team, as well as the communication team, providing regular updates to our councillors so that everyone's in the loop. But I suppose the key one out of all this was, having the resources, that support to be able to respond to any pivots in your planned program as quickly as possible. Because if there's one thing I learned in waste, is that people are very precious about waste and their rubbish, and what you might think is a small problem can quickly escalate, and it's only expedited and exacerbated these days with social media. So some of our difficulties in rolling out the program is we've got a very diverse and transient population. So the challenge was trying to connect with as many residents as possible. And how we solutionised that was we did a lot of door knocking. We basically flooded our social media with Fogo in the months leading up, and once Fogo was delivered, we flooded the social media. We actually employed a dedicated social media person that was on our social media, responding to questions and putting things out on social media so that the message was getting communicated. We also have, apart from a transit population, and what I noted before, a lot of non-English speaking background people. So we did a lot of workshops in different languages, and we also made a lot of our collaterals in different languages, but also with a key focus on, big, bold, graphics that people can resonate with, regardless of, whether they can or can't speak or read English. We utilised other assets that we owned in council, so, bus shelters. I don't know the technical term for it, but, we've got a number of poles throughout our LGA where we put flags, and we specifically designed Fogo flags so that it was basically in your face in the lead up to Fogo, mostly after it. We also, so I'll move on. So these are just some of the photos, as you note, that we did a lot of pop-up stores. So that's going to our town centres, train stations, and just having that presence. So we're capturing people as they're going about their daily business or rushing to and from work, trying to grab a bit of their moment, sort of leaning on the experience of those charity organisations that try to catch you as you go about, as well as attendance at family fun days. Leading on the theme, just more photos, but leading on the theme of trying to engage the kids, we actually, so your bottom right, my bottom left, you'll notice Mike there with a puppet. So we actually had that puppet made, and we worked with Mike and his team to come up with a puppet show, which we then rolled out and did presentations. And don't quote me on it, but I think to date we've probably run about 15 or so of these workshops. And they've been quite engaging, and we've received a lot of positive feedback. And most certainly, I personally, on a personal note, have had a few parents reach out to me about their kids influencing them on behaviour change and whatnot. So, We also rolled out a Fogo champion where we engaged Joe Taranto to run that program for us. I won't speak too much into the details because I understand Joe is doing a presentation later on today, so I'll let her speak to that. But essentially, we had over 100 people registered for becoming a champion, and 40 of them went through with the training. And the idea of these champions was, that extra mouthpiece out in the community, helping to spread the message of Fogo, whether it's to their neighbours in their complex or their neighbours on the street. So cold education, again, in the interest of time, I'll fly through that. But essentially, it's just reinforcing that, we translated all our collaterals into the main languages and focused on a lot of pictures. Like any council, at the start of rolling out Fogo, we spoke to other councils, learnt what they learnt, try to copy that because there was no need to reinvent the wheel. So, we thought we were pretty confident. We learned from their mistakes. We won't repeat it. So we developed a whole bunch of FAQs and strategized on how we delivered it. But, along the way, we had to adapt and pivot. The importance, I suppose, of this liner, and there's a funny story, which I've told some of you already, but when we rolled out the liners, a lot of complaints we received was, we don't know how to open the liner. And so last minute, we had to develop a video to teach people how to open the liner. I'll leave it at that. There was also, data gaps. So whilst we did a lot of reconciliation to make sure our data was right just before we rolled out the bins, because obviously that influences how many bins we ordered. But along the way, as we were actually physically rolling out bins, we discovered, all these properties that weren't subdivided but had extra bins, granny flats that had extra bins along the time. So, it's just, you just learn to live with it and adapt and pivot when those things, when you're challenged with those things. So for us, next steps, so obviously, like I mentioned, we're planning now the rollout of stage 2. We've just recently completed a Fogo survey, so we're just obviously learning, getting the feedback from that, learning to improve not only Fogo stage 1, but also what to include in Fogo stage 2. We're heavily focusing on now with contamination audits, so as part of our resources and part of the waste team, and that explains the dashboard. So we have staff on ground that physically go out, check bins, check for contamination, door knock, speak to the residents to improve that service. And that's critical because that lends back to the contract that we have with our service provider who processes Fogo. Because in our contract, we do have tier pricing for contamination. So it's one of those things that you need to remember. Even though you've signed a contract, you're appointing contractors, but there's that ongoing relationship that you have to have with the contractors. Because it's one of the things, it's 10 years that you need to work with them to help ensure that the product meets the outcomes that we're working towards. And for us, what that looks like is that, on a weekly basis or every once a month, I'm sending my process team and go, how are we tracking with contamination? What are we seeing as the main trends coming out so that we can deal with it early on from an education perspective? And obviously it works in our best interest because if we can keep the contamination down, it also means that the fee I'm paying from a tonnage perspective is reduced as well. And who knows, if I achieve no contamination, maybe we can strike up a negotiation of reducing my fees even further. But we'll go from there. That's a potential next step, maybe. So I guess just to sum things up, what is best practice? So that was obviously a best practice for Parramatta, but there might be opportunities for your councils to take some of that and go, that works for us entirely. But it's one of those things about be open to change, have the resources, have those early discussions on with the internal stakeholders because you're going to need them on that journey, and one size doesn't fit all. And it takes time to educate residents. It's not like one of those overnight switches where you go, here's a bin, put it in, and a miracle happens. If you look at recycling, it's taken decades, and it's no different to Fogo. And that's the end of my presentation.
Grab a seat. Could I ask the panellists to jump up on the floor while they're coming? A little anecdote about teething problems. Andrew, you say about people not understanding how to open the bags. I remember going out to a composter and the Fogo was running up the conveyor belt and the operator was pulling all the plastic bags off, and he was pulling indiscriminately Fogo bags and Target shopping bags. And I said, "What are you doing with that?" And he said, "Well, they're all bags. I can't tell what's in them, so they're all going to landfill." And that was a teething problem, and I'm sure it doesn't happen anymore from all the reputable composters in the room, but it's a learning curve. All right, we have about 15 minutes. I invite you all to ask questions from the floor, and if you're not vigorous and enthused, I will ask vigorous and enthusing questions for you. There are a couple of microphones rolling around, so happy to take a question. Was that Andrea up the back waving? It is. Oh, just saying hello. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, it's a very simple one. That $50 per week that was quoted for the additional service, having waste and Fogo every week, can I ask what the workings of that was? What made that figure be that figure?
Would you like me to jump in on that one, Aaron? Yeah.
I thought it was Mike.
Yeah, the difference in a weekly service and a fortnightly service is basically 26 lifts a year. And if you take an average Fogo lift rate at about $2, you get that $50 rate. Now, Fogos are often a lot cheaper than that if you're in Metro Sydney, slightly more if you're in remote rural, but $2 is kind of a worst case for most councils, so just to be upfront. But we generally say $30 to $50, depending on, which is less than a quarter of a cappuccino per week per house. I mean, let's not overcook this stuff. It's cheap. And we say, do it properly from the outset. And also, in terms of those things, make sure you have a contamination schedule so that the composters are getting enough money to actually do the things that they need to do to clean it up to get it back to market. And that sliding scale of contamination should be built into your contracts. And I know councils sometimes say, "Oh, we don't want to pay more." I promise you, if you don't have a sliding scale, you are paying more because the contractors hedge for that underlying contamination rate. They are not going to take risk from you to them. They will hedge their base cost. So they are two very simple messages with Fogo implementation. Another question down the front here?
Hi, my name's Mandy. I'm from Canterbury Bankstown Council. I find it interesting. Yes. Aaron, yeah, you talked about weekly was your best practice kind of thing. And I know Parramatta's done it, a lot of councils have done it. However, the EPA has always said weekly, fortnightly is best practice, and that's what we should be achieving. Yep. Wondering thoughts from EPA on that. Are we really going to achieve the diversion that we need with weekly? Because I know the mandate only says weekly Fogo. You don't mention red bin. You're not being that specific, descriptive. But yeah.
Look, is that working? Yep.
Yeah, it is.
When we drafted the legislation, we left it up to councils as to those other things because each individual council is best placed to answer that for their residents. The guide that you're referring to, there is a bit of nuance to it. So it is referring to a 120 litre red lid bin. So obviously, if you're looking at the 80 litre bin scenario, it's a different kind of circumstance as it is. Look, I think the way we've drafted legislation is so that councils have that ability. The updated version of that best practice guide also says it is just a guide, and the nuance is that each individual council will have its own circumstances.
Can I just jump in on that a different way? The way we approach it with councils, if they're nervous about pushing the red bin to fortnightly, is just do it weekly for now, and you can make that decision as a two-step dance in 3 years' time when your community is comfortable and they understand Fogo properly and they're capturing 60% plus of the food, then you can kick the red bin to a fortnightly if you really want to. Of course they're not going to. And he's absolutely spot on with his, it's a guide, so there's a bit of guidance. Look, just do a two-step dance.
When we did that best practice guide did have some alterations made to it. When we have spoken about it during the legislative, like going through the legislative process, it was talking about, you know, it can be a future state, as Mike's just said. You can, like, if you're looking from a change management perspective, making fewer changes to residents can be beneficial. And then you can look to, as people realise, 40% of my red bin is empty, then you can make that change down the track.
Excellent. The mobile phone owner gets to ask a question. Who are you? Stand up. I bet it was Ron Smith up the back there. There's a hand in the air over here. Oh, sorry. All right.
Hi, Anna from City of Parramatta. This is for Zach, but aimed at the EPA, not at you. With food waste for businesses, you seem to say that councils are going to, you know, enact this and stuff, but where are councils going to get more funding to train our health officers on waste or train businesses for what they need to do? It seems to be put on council, but with no guidance.
You mean the commercial food mandate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is guidance being developed, I will say that. There has also been a commitment from the government that there will be support where it's needed. I can't obviously say anything at the moment. That's a decision for government as to, you know, financial supports and things like that. But during the, you know, legislative process, in those second reading speeches, it was expressed by the minister that there would be support where that's needed. Yeah, that's about what I've got.
Right, there was a lady over here. I'll come back to you next.
In that special place called Adelaide, we have certified compostables because we have we have a very mature green organics curbside collection, and food organics has been added to that by various councils slowly and surely, and we have 2 major composters for Adelaide. So we have certified compostables going into that Fogo system. How many years off do you think, perhaps Aaron and Zach, would you be going down that path, or would you ever go down that path, bearing in mind that ABA can do this certification and hopefully provide some assurances?
It's about compostable packaging, I believe, certified compostable packaging, and when should it go into the Fogo bin, because it's currently prohibited.
EPA's position statement on it is that the caddy liners are the only thing that should go in other than food and other organics. I guess the point of that is it adding any beneficial value. So the preference is to keep all of that out of it. And
Aaron, did you want to comment?
My view is to keep it out. There's enough confusion out there at the moment with bins, and to add in a wooden fork that might compost, or the compostable type bag products, keep it out, keep it very simple. That's why I congratulate Parramatta Council on their education programs, very, very well done. But keep it out at the moment. We're not mature enough at the moment. Food waste to the green bin, so you can imagine yourself, is my theory.
I was just going to add, I think one of the biggest problems is your pre-processing of your Fogo material at the front end will, it's difficult to distinguish between one bag and another bag, and we have so much of an issue in supermarkets that are just producing compostable, degradable, environmentally friendly. But if you're on a picking line or you've got a trommel, it doesn't differentiate. So that's the big challenge, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but what the point Sean's making, if a clear cup is coming up a picking line, you have no idea whether it's PET or compostable, cornstarch. You can't know, you don't have time. So you make a call, it's rubbish. So there's absolutely no advantage to putting those compostables into Fogo, at least now, until we have a far better labelling system across Australia. The gentleman up the back.
Hi there, thank you. This might be directed towards the EPA as well, Zach. The source separated organic waste ACCU methodology sounds like it will be really suitable for funding some of these projects, but I suspect that the mandate might conflict with the additionality criteria. Is that the case?
Can you say the first part of that again, sorry?
So the federal safeguard mechanism with the ACCU projects, carbon credit units, the source separated organic waste methodology looks like, for me, ideal for separating organic waste from its source. But additionality requirements require that there's no legal requirement for people to do this. And so it's going to happen, if it's going to happen anyway because it's a legal requirement, then you can't get the carbon credit. And I presume the mandate blocks the carbon credit project.
I don't believe there's anything in the legislation itself which would block anything to do with that, because we're not mandating methodologies or anything in that regard. So I'm not sure how the legislation would block that.
Do you want me to have a crack? You're right. Once it's mandated and once the regulation comes in, if it's not above business as usual, and it'll become business as usual when it's mandated. So for those councils in the room thinking of adding food, and you only get it for adding food, you don't get it for garden organics, which is regarded as business as usual. But if you're moving to Fogo, then in the next 4 years, you have a right to create credits for a 7-year crediting period plus 5. But you've got to do it now, and you have to register a project. If you wait until the regulation requires you to do it, then the Commonwealth says it's not above business as usual. So there is an urgency for you. And by the way, and it's never been tested.
Right.
So there is a little bit of greyness around that.
I'll be by the cafe if anyone wants to talk to me.
Sorry, up the back.
Hey, it's
Yeah, you're good.
yep. It's great to hear that the EPA is going to do a statewide communications collateral. How are they going to manage the fact that some councils are doing FO and some are doing FOGO?
Well, I think I would also point to where councils are doing that. When we're talking about the collateral, FOGO, it's still going to be a change for people. But when councils choose to just do separate FO and GO, sorry, I don't know what's happening. I would suggest it's almost a little bit of what Kate was talking about this morning with the narrow casting as opposed to broadcasting. Where councils make that decision, which the legislation allows them to do, there has to be an acceptance that the communications is targeted at what the majority of councils will go with, and it is. Is that better? Sorry. I think, yeah, part of it is going to have to be an acceptance that some of those councils where there is a choice to go in that direction, the broadcast message will not be as effective for them. The narrow casting is what they're going to have to do at a local level.
Sean, anyone else? Andrew, did you want to comment on that? You happy? Okay. Next question. Pat.
Oh, hi,
Coming to you
Chris Owen from City of Gold Coast. We don't have a mandate in Queensland as yet. I'm interested from a ratepayer perspective, given the additional costs moving from GO to FOGO or from zero to FOGO, whether it's bin changes, collection changes, processing cost increases. Have you had, particularly in Parramatta, any feedback from your ratepayers about who's paying the bill? Has that been a point of conversation, or is the EPA coming through with some big grant dollars to take the edge off that for you?
Before I start, I'd just like to say the chairs up here are a lot comfier than the ones down there. So, yeah, look, I wish EPA came to the table with grant funding for our stage one, but unfortunately they didn't. For our council, and I can't speak for other councils, but mostly my council, we plan long term. So, as you appreciate, each council collects a domestic waste charge, and we had a waste strategy. We also did long term financial planning at the very early onset to go. These are some of the CapEx or OpEx projects that we wanted to deliver in the long term, and so we built our reserve up for these services to eventuate, and most certainly we aligned it with a collection contract. So in terms of costs, we absorbed that cost through the reserve. So when we implemented Fogo, there was no rate increase for our residents. Hopefully that answers the question.
One of the points is, to be blunt, New South Wales has a higher landfill levy than Queensland, so the break-even point is simpler in New South Wales than it is in Queensland, but your levy is rising rapidly, so by the year 2030, it will almost certainly be break-even, if not slightly cheaper to do Fogo.
I was just going to add, Mike, that the reality of it is, though, as soon as you add food to green, you need to compost it in a facility that's enclosed. You need air control systems. There's a whole raft of things. So it is much more expensive to do. That's just the reality.
Yep, in the middle. Oh, sorry, Patrick down the front here, if you wouldn't mind.
I had to say something, didn't I? I think we need to leave this room today with this concept that contamination is, without a doubt, is something that we cannot overlook. We've got an industry that probably leads the world in some ways, Australia. I'll say Australia, New South Wales and South Australia, because the rest of the country is not that flash. Sorry, guys. We also have led the world in standards, quality of product. And I can say that with all honesty over the Europeans, England, and the US even. Whilst US leads the world in technology and, open windrow composting systems, they do millions and millions of tonnes of waste. Their products are pretty substandard. We're heading for absolute disaster if we don't take in the concept of contamination. And it starts with the councils. You've got to get this rollout right. We can't process something that's uncompostable, unusable into a first-grade product. The EPA, moving forward, will be looking very hard at the quality of products. They're looking for things that we can't see. Now, they've started on PFAS, microplastics, organochlorines, all the major elements. They're overviewing the biosolids industry. We're in for some huge changes. It's all going to be based around quality of products. So please, everybody in the room, take, the quality as a serious issue. Thanks.
Yeah. Let me ask the question of anyone in council. Does anyone in council believe that you shouldn't have contamination bans in your contracts, that you should pay more if you contaminate more and you pay less if you produce a better quality material out of your Fogo bins? Does anybody disagree with that concept? In which case, be brave, stand up and tell us why. Because I get it from councillors all the time. They say to me, Mike, why should we voluntarily pay more? We want the right to contaminate. Someone mentioned earlier there was a scope put out recently that said you must accept 20% Fogo contamination. Now that is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. It has to come with at least a $30 or $50 per tonne premium to pay these guys to be able to sort it and get it to something approaching saleable, as Patrick says. So if anyone disagrees, I'll be very happy to have the debate, and we need to take that back to councillors because there's no free lunch. And if you do produce contaminated material, the compost industry will hedge and they'll put their base costs up because they don't believe you. They'll expect you to produce crap input product. Up the back, and then I'll come to you, sir.
Thanks. My name's Anne Luke. I'm actually a councillor, but I'm very ignorant about this whole process. So I come from Gunnedah in northwestern New South Wales, which is a rural area. We produce lovely crops and cattle and sheep and coal, actually. But this is my first ever waste conference. I don't really understand with the Fogo what's happening to it to actually make sure that it isn't in itself, whether there's plastics in it or not, whether it isn't going to contaminate things. I hear from, who was it, Andrew, that talked about in Parramatta, the percentage of people who are actually of various ethnic origins, do a lot of travelling. I watch border security on television and see people trying to smuggle food in. Then Aaron talked earlier than that about his 40 acres and how he actually sort of got some material to spread on his farm. Has he got any cattle there? I'm not a councillor, we don't get very much money in the country for being a councillor, but I'm actually a vet. And I worry about things like foot and mouth disease and those sorts of things coming through. Is the Fogo going to be sterilised, autoclaved, the food waste? It just seems to be such a much higher level of contamination to threaten some really important industries in Australia, and especially in the country. I mean, maybe you don't worry about it in the more built-up areas, but in the country, it's a real concern.
Great point, and I don't think you're going to get any disagreement from the compost industry. But let's hand it to Aaron as the composter on the panel.
Yeah, there is emerging risk when it comes to that. When you make a compost 4454 standard, you heat it up to 55 degrees for a period of 3 days, you can make a good compost. Fogo compost with the red food waste going to still can be composting and still make a product out of it. However, what you're talking about is potential for plastics and migration of plastics into animals eating grasses.
All right.
It can be composted properly. 4454, the heat profile, the pasteurisation of products is done still. So there's no issues with that when it comes to seed germination, all those contaminants. They're all composted during the heat process, so you won't have an issue.
55 degrees, is that your temperature?
It's for a period of 3 days. It's 55 degrees till it's pasteurised.
Doubt it, but still.
I think there's a coffee conversation with Patrick Saws down here, who's been doing this for 40 years, and I'm sure he'll give you war and peace on AS4454. The gentleman down the front, and then unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up because we're eating into coffee o'clock.
Thank you. Yeah, Peter from the Hillshire Council. Just wanted to comment on the contamination situation that was brought up, and I do agree with that. I'm not brave enough not to. No, joking. But I think the reality is that we might need to prioritise contamination reduction over diversion, especially when it comes to muds. So I just also wanted to flag that, especially maybe from an EPA perspective and the mandate. We need to be really cautious with our muds, and it's a big challenge, and we need to be realistic about that situation. So yeah, I just wanted to make that statement, that I don't think we can have both necessarily. I think it needs to be a really slow approach, and we need to get it right.
Yeah, well, I think, Andrew, you've outlined that. What do you want to comment on that? That's very much the Parramatta approach.
Yeah, so again, we focused on encouraging participation, but not being so forceful, with the efforts of increasing, getting the participation, getting the knowledge and the willingness to do so, and then focusing on contamination, towards the end. I mean, initial data suggests that we've got, it's coming through in terms of contamination at a rate that, we believe is comfortable, but I only received those data recently, so it's really waiting for the report to look at the actual participation. And I think that's just a reminder for councils in general to go, Fogo takes time. It'll take time for people to get on board, and it's been mixed in with garden organics that has been in some councils for a very long time. And so, some of that initial onset where you're looking at it and celebrating and going, oh, it's low contamination, now that we've introduced Fogo, you need to actually look into the details of it and going, well, how much Fogo is actually in the stream that was audited? And it's just, I suppose, highlighting that one of the risks is as Fogo matures, as more people jump on board, and along with that complexities and other challenges, if you start the debates around, can bamboo, forks and all that go in and whatnot, you will see a spike in contamination. And that's a risk that you just have to prepare for and sustain that education to manage in the long term.
Yeah, I think the message there is build communications into your contracts and make sure you have that funding as a continuous stream. Best practice contamination now is down around 0.5%, 0.4% a number of councils are quoting. So, 4% is an incredible start. I mean, that is incredible, and we've seen 20%. So we've got to get it down to that 2% at least. I think the average Australian contamination rate's 2.2%, but it needs to be driven by ongoing communications and engagement with your community. All right, unfortunately, we have to draw this to an end. Would you please join with me in thanking an excellent conversation and panel?